welcome to. That's fine, because it's on the agenda.
All right. Well, let me just go back to the executive session. I thought we had to vote to go into executive session.
But we're not. I'm not voting to go into. I'm not putting that up to a vote right now.
Okay. All right.
I'm just saying there are certain personnel issues that would need to be discussed in an executive session.
All right. So I guess what I'm understanding then is on Sunday there would be a motion to go into executive session to discuss the attorneys?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think for
Not that. No, that's not exactly correct. Not to discuss the attorneys, to discuss a personnel issue.
All right, but you have to be specific.
But we don't. That is specific. You don't. Of course, I'm not going to be specific, Mark. You say to go into executive session to discuss a personnel issue with a particular person.
With all due respect, Madam Supervisor, the town law does dictate that you have to, with some specificity, determine why you're going into executive session.
I'm going into I would like to go into executive session to discuss a personnel issue.
Okay. Well, that's okay.
And I can't reveal the personnel issue, or I wouldn't need an executive session.
All right.
That's as specific as one has to be when you're asking for an executive
Well,
session.
for sake of argument, I think everybody knows what the executive session is for. But in any event, let me, if I can just go through my thoughts anyway, just to let everybody know my thoughts on the attorneys. We did have some resumes. We had Mrs. Hamlin had taken some notes. Thank you very much. When Tom and Mrs. Stern were reviewing the resumes, the questions were fairly consistent among the candidates. So I just want the community to know the answers to some of the specific questions, and of all three attorneys. Availability, I'm sorry. There were four. You're right. We just had another one. That's correct. No, I asked Madam Supervisor if I could go through this, and she did give me permission. And as far as the privilege of the floor, I don't think we're in the privilege of the floor, correct?
There is no privilege of the floor during a town board meeting.
So, in terms of availability by phone, William Bogle is always available by phone, individually or collectively. George Rodden, I'm sorry?
Excuse me, Mark, I don't know if we have the right to be specific. This is a personnel matter. We should not be discussing who the people are who have applied for this position.
Contractual.
This is a personnel matter.
It's a contractual, he's not an employee.
Yeah, it is contractual. We do have to get some order on the privilege of the floor, Madam Supervisor.
I think that I would prefer that we check this out before you go any further. If you would like to bring it up later, I think that's fine, and explain your reasons afterwards. I think that's fine, but I think we're out of order.
I don't think so. I just received permission from the supervisor. I think in the interest of the community, and I think in terms of open government and transparency, the community should have some indication of what was decided in the interview. After all, we did have members of the public attend the interview. Not everybody was invited. So I think it's only fair that they know some of the issues at hand. I don't see the problem with that.
I would appreciate it if you're going to go through it with some efficiency.
Yes, I will.
Obviously, these things are public information. Whatever needs to be discussed in executive session will not be discussed in public.
I understand.
But we also are going to be discussing this on Sunday, and I think, I just don't want to belabor it, Mark.
No, I
Go ahead.
understand.
Go ahead.
I will go as quickly as I can.
Go ahead, please.
In terms of availability by phone, Mr. Bogle, available individually or collectively to the board. Mr. Rodenhausen, candidate number 2. Rodenhausen, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Basically the same thing. Availability by phone, no problem. Call me anytime, individually or collectively. Richard Olson, let me see. Tom Dewhurst asked Mr. Olson what he would do if a town board member wanted to ask him a question, to which Mr. Olson replied that he doesn't work for free, he works for the town board, and if they collectively want to ask him a question, it was fine. So my understanding is he wouldn't answer individual questions. Number 2, the fees. Mr. Bogle a retainer fee
You
of
forgot
$10,000.
You forgot Warren Reese.
Warren Reese was available. Warren Reese was available individually. In terms of the fees, William Bogle, $10,000 for an annual retainer at an hourly rate of $150. Mr. Olson, the same thing, $10,000 a year with a $150 an hour fee. Mr. Rodenhausen, initially he thought that, matter of fact, it says here, he went on to state that he was trying to get $15,000 to $17,000 as a retainer, even in a small town. He mentioned the option of going to an hourly rate, but eventually he did acquiesce and said that he would come down to the $10,000, but his hourly fee would be $175 an hour. As far as attending board meetings...
Mr. Reese?
I'm sorry?
Mr. Reese?
Mr. Reese was the same thing. Forgive me. Mr. Bogle, as far as attending board meetings, he would be in attendance at the board meetings. Mr. Olson, basically the same thing, that he would be attending all of the board meetings. Mr. Candidate number 3. The discussion turned to logistics.
They all would attend board meetings.
Well, he says here, in his letter, it says, in these positions, I was assisted by my associate, Victoria Palladoro, and either she or I would attend every board meeting, and the same thing for candidate number 4. And the last item, again, the questions were pretty much consistent across the board, and forgive me, but I do think that the community should know about these things. And the last item was campaign finance. Mr. Bogle continued to say that campaign finance, his prior position was basically stated that no, you really could not do it if it's not voluntary. If it's not voluntary, you still really couldn't do it. I think that's all documented in the board minutes. Mr. Olson, when asked the question, had said.
He said if it was policy, it didn't have anything to do with any possible litigation.
Okay, I'll read it
Excuse me,
exactly as it was
Can I
written.
ask a question, Mark?
Let me just finish, because I know we're
Were
out of
you
time.
present at the interviews?
Virginia, I'm reading the results of the interviews.
Were you present at the interviews?
Virginia Stern then related how, at the beginning of this year's campaign, she wanted the town board to endorse a voluntary finance campaign statement. They were advised that writing such a statement by the board would bring the town open to litigation. Mr. Olson replied that if it's just policy statement, how could it subject the town to litigation? I am concerned with that, and these are my own words, because Mr. Olson was never given the resolution. He didn't have the facts and circumstances, but yet he wanted to give an answer. And Mr. Rodenhausen and the other gentleman, interestingly enough, were not even asked the question. So, anyway, I just wanted to give a quick overview to the community.
Tom, would you like to say anything?
Well, if everybody's going to be in attendance Sunday, I'd be more than happy to. My feeling is that, like I said in the first board meeting, every one of these lawyers is extremely competent. They got a list of accomplishments and schooling and everything as long as your arm, okay? Like was pointed out, George Rodenhausen, his fees were not really what we expected, so he's basically out. Rich Olson, who works for McCabe and Mack, I feel as though, for me personally, it's maybe not a conflict of interest, but my family uses McCabe and Mack as personal lawyers, okay? And I believe there's other people that work there that we know, and I don't think it would be good for the town to have members of the board bring in a law firm where either one or more of the board members either knows or does work for, uses that firm for